Hey, everybody, this is Ted Lowe, one of the hosts of the Married People podcast, where we want to make marriage real, fun, and simple. My partners in crime and co-host Afton and CJ are not with me today. Yes, that makes me very, very sad, but I did get an opportunity that made me very, very happy. I actually got to sit down with Ryan and Selena Frederick as they talked about why Jesus is important for my marriage. Ryan and Selena are the founders of Fierce Marriage, an online marriage platform, which includes a blog and a podcast, social media channels, and several books written by Ryan and Selena. They've been married for 15 years and live in Tacoma, Washington with their 2 daughters. So let's just go ahead and dive in with my interview with Ryan and Selena. Ryan and Selena, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Doing this. Yeah. It's been so fun. You know, Ryan, you and I connected how many years ago?
Oh, man, that would have been, I think, 4 or 5 years ago in Dallas, yeah.
Yeah, we were at a restaurant. I remember that. We were sitting in a restaurant with John McGee and a couple other folks.
Yeah.
Was Cunningham with us?
No, I think maybe Scott Kuddershaw. I can't. And then, one other gentleman, but yeah.
Well, it was so fun. You know, people talk about first impressions, but I just remember talking with you and just your heart of humility and saying, what are you guys learning and finding? And so that was been so great. And then to see you guys really trust yourselves, being in this generation with the current generation and how you guys are speaking into them. And, you know, you guys are, you're in front of millions of people. You know, we were discussing before we started how crazy it is. You know, here we are with these mics in this back room at a conference, and all of a sudden we're on radio, right? So for you guys, tell me a little bit about you. Tell me a little bit about how you guys met and your journey, and then we'll dive into some practical pieces.
Yeah, so I'll take this one because I remember it so clearly the first time I saw Selena, and it was actually in 8th grade. My mom was an educator, and she had been teaching at a school up near Seattle, a Christian school, and that's where I grew up going to school. She was actually considering transferring to a small rural Christian school in a town called Puyallup, which, if you know where that is, good for you. It's a small town south of Seattle, and I was just brought along for the ride when she was interviewing, and I went to go check out this school as a prospective student, and I walked into the gymnasium because it was the middle of a gym class, and lo and behold, there she was, this amazing girl, and my stomach dropped through the soles of my shoes. Man, it was crazy, and I obviously thought, nothing of it. I thought it was just, hormones. I'm used to that sort of thing when you're 14 years old, 15 years old. Actually, I was like 13 or 14. Anyway. Yeah, so I ended up going to that school, don't talk to her really for a whole year, and then we ended up becoming friends, and then that friendship turned into a romance, and eventually I think it was our summer after our sophomore year. It was July 27th, 1999. 26th, 1999, 24th.
Oh my goodness.
I forget. The anniversary is what matters. Anyway, and then, so we dated for 4 years, and then I got married pretty young, 20-ish, 21.
Was everyone supportive of that? Like when you guys get married, your family's like, yay, this is good? Or were they like, whoa, you guys need to wait?
I think families were supportive. Looking back, I remember being asked by people like, oh, you guys are so young. And I remember not picking up on that, being like, yeah, it's fine.
My attitude was, so we had always it was a Christian school, and we were good kids. Like my rebellious years had stopped when I got to this new school because I think I matured out of them. Found Jesus. Thanks to my lovely girlfriend. And so people were kind of supportive of us, but in hindsight, I think it was a little young. But my attitude was I can't wait any longer. I figured it's better to marry than to burn with passion, right? That's literally what I thought. And we were trying not to, we saved ourselves. We didn't have sex until we got married, and that was not easy as a 18, 19, 20-year-old guy. And so literally I sold my car, bought a ring, asked her to marry me.
Sealed the deal.
Yes.
I love it. And so for you guys, so that is pretty young, right?
Yeah.
And young's relative, some people are, younger at 40 than you guys probably were at 20. What were the first surprises for you guys once you got married? Or what did you think, because especially in the Christian space, we'll say, man, if you wait it's magical and it's perfect and
Yeah.
it's something that no one else is going to experience.
Yeah.
Not to dive too intimate too quick, but
Well,
I just did.
Well,
Sorry.
you played that card. So really I'm going to go again. I really want to hear your side too. But as a young Christian guy in that I think generation, we're in our mid-30s right now. And so, 15 years ago, it was like, I kissed dating goodbye, all that stuff had happened while we were in high school. And so I'm thinking, well, once we get married, sex is going to be everything I want and more. It's going to be amazing all the time, everywhere, like, to be honest. And then you get married and obviously your expectation has to adjust and it's different, but better. But that I think was the biggest kind of reality check for me. Now, it wasn't like a huge drawn out thing. I just realized, okay, but then there's when you're tired and you're frustrated and you're not getting what you want or expect, that creates fights, which then create, wounds because you're young. You wound each other in ways you're immature in your communication. So I could go on and on, but that's the first one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, you hit it nail on the head. It definitely was learning how to manage those expectations as a wife. You want to be a good wife on every level. Intimately, you want to. At least I never wanted you to have to want or look anywhere else or say, oh man, I wish we were like this. Those are words can be crushing. And so, but you can't, right? A wife can't uphold all of those things and be all of those people. So there was definitely the tension there of understanding that I can't carry it all and that's okay. And we're learning to do this together. And I think that's what made it so much, at least our intimacy life, it's been very unique because we've only known each other, right? And but we had to grow in that. It was obviously not always like that. There's struggles, there's conversations you have to have. But the cool thing and the beautiful thing about that is it's within the bounds of covenant. So I'm not going to have those conversations with anybody else. And that's where our intimacy, I feel like, is solidified. And that's where we become one even more and we grow in that. And that's the beautiful depth that happens when you are just with that one person.
Yeah, it's gotten better with time.
Yeah.
And I would say to the young couple who's listening to this, maybe experiencing this or headed for this, that it's just the beginning of this long adventure of learning how to love each other in this specific way. Now, we did have other issues that we dealt with as well, but a lot of the kind of the humorous kind of she wanted to eat the toilet paper this way, and that whole thing. That wasn't really we didn't really argue on a lot of that kind of stuff. We had immediately merged our finances, and we were dirt poor, so there wasn't much to argue about.
That wasn't a lot to merge. Huh?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot to merge. She gave me her $1, I put it in my account, added it to my $1. But yeah.
So in those first few years, did you guys have, let me back up. What were the marriages like, if you guys are comfortable talking about it, in your families, did you see growing up? Did you guys see great marriages? Did you see broken ones? And how did that impact your relationship, especially those first few years?
Yeah, no, so I came from a divorced home. My parents got divorced when I was about 8 years old. My brother was about 4. So I didn't really know what marriage looked like. I think I had an ideal, And so again, there's those expectations that you see that I think I should be like this. This is what I see on TV. This is what I see at my friend's house. The high points. This is how I never got to really I think I heard the arguing and the messes of my parents, but that was kind of it, And so I kind of saw the high and the low, and not really like the in between, which is where we tend to exist most of the time. You have a different story.
So my parents were together my whole life. They're still together. They've been married 48 years, I think now. And so they're amazing, but they've also got they've had big explosive arguments, not necessarily healthy in every season. No marriage is healthy in every season, but being able to watch that, my dad had 2 ultimatums growing up for me, which I don't know why he chose these 2, but I know why, but one was, don't have any tattoos, which we already broke that one. I got my dad, we got the same tattoos, my dad, my brother, and I. So my dad, he scratched that one off. The other one was don't have sex before you get married. And then I guess part of that was marriage is one person for life. And it's not something, it's a covenant. He's so that was the environment growing up. And so marriage has always had that kind of level of importance in my own mind, and I know that's influenced us.
Well, we kind of had that resolve going into it, that this wasn't something that we were going to, even me, and I feel like God's probably planted that seed, and thanks to being in a local church, having friends that love the Lord and ministers that I learned from, that when I knew that when I got married, I wasn't going to get divorce. Just was not an option.
So did you grow up in the church?
Yes. I should have mentioned that. And that's been monumental to my growth and my expectations of when I get married. This is for life. I don't have any other options. I don't want any other options.
Just to touch on that, with the church, we work with churches a lot. We want to help churches, help marriages. And I think sometimes when people in church, they feel like they're the only ones that are experiencing things that are tough, especially if they come from divorce. Am I the only family there? Well, the numbers are telling us different. And so I love it when I hear a story of somebody said, yeah, my parents got a divorce when I was 8 and my brother was 4, but we had good people around us. We had good pastors around us that were still preaching this message, or not preaching, but teaching this message of us that, hey, that marriage is supposed to last a lifetime. So you came in from that's what got modeled, but it was modeled in a different way for you. So I think that's a beautiful thing as churches that we got to remember to go, hey, we can still model
Absolutely.
For all of us, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And teach that as the ideal, knowing that people are still broken. They're coming from broken situations, but the gospel is redemptive and will make something beautiful out of that. And I like to think he has with us, and that he's taken that brokenness that you came from, and now we have, something lasting so far. But
how many years? How many years?
15.
15 years. Yeah. So here's the question for you guys. Tell me what got you into the marriage space. Like, what made you go, we want to pour into marriage? Just talk a little bit about maybe your careers and your journey of how you ended up here.
Yeah, that was I would call it a quarter life crisis. So about 7 years ago, I was working. We have a web development company that we have a small team that does a lot of projects, and I'll have input on that. But at the time, I was designing and developing and writing code myself and doing all that. And when we launched that business about 10 years ago, so we're about 3-4 years into it at this point. When I had this revelation, this crisis rather, and we had kind of gotten these clients that I thought would be like the holy grail, right, of marketing, advertising, design, development. And we were working for like Delta Airlines and like MasterCard and these big clients on the East Coast. And here we were, Southern California, boutique firm, originally from Seattle, feeling like, hey, we're really living the dream. And I'm sitting there working these long hours, and I'm like, I hate this. It's no fun. There's no purpose. It doesn't pay that great. And I'm staring at a computer all day long, and it's sunny outside. I felt like, I was like, why am I doing this? And I just kind of threw my hands up, and I was just praying to God, what do you have for me? I feel like I'm okay at this, but it's not fun. I'm not gifted in the true like savant sense. I feel like I'm just a jack of all trades, master of none type of thing. And he said, well, what do you have in your hand right now that you can use for my glory? And all throughout our relationship, we always wanted it to be, we wanted to do it God's way, and we wanted to model that to our peers as best we could, knowing that we didn't have it figured out. We weren't like preaching at them, but we wanted to do it the way we thought the Bible laid it out, and we trusted that. And so immediately I thought marriage. And at the time, I'd also been doing all the work for publishers in Nashville and up in Grand Rapids and Chicago. And so I had worked with authors in the projects we had done for the publishers. And I knew how to build websites, I knew how to do marketing, design, all that kind of stuff. So I thought, you know what if we started a marriage ministry? Marriage is what we know. We were just about 10 years married at that point. So I thought maybe we had something to add. The other part of it was...
we had seen a lot of our friends, unfortunately, go through their first 5-7 years of marriage and divorce, maybe even remarried, twice divorced. And we were just saying, God, what's the difference here? Why are we sort of working, or why are you allowing this to work in different ways that maybe their marriage didn't?
Why are we happy and together still?
And wanting to be together and enjoying each other and not just barely hanging on by a thread. And our relationship came. And
the clear, as clear as day, it's just Jesus. There's no other reason that we're together. And I mean, there's plenty of times that we could have pursued divorce and started headed down that path. But it was knowing Christ and knowing how we're loved in Him, our identity in Him, and He's the reason we're together. And so at that point, we realized, okay, there's actually something to be said in this space for people that are us, that are our age, in this stage of marriage. And yes, we don't know it all. And kind of one of our axioms that we say all the time is, we don't know everything, but what we do know, we'll share it openly and transparently. And so for better or worse, we'll share our failures, our successes.
Well, you're on the right podcast because that's how this rolls. Yeah.
Sweet. Right at home. So yeah, from there, I kind of spent a month or so building out kind of like what I thought would be the plan. And then I pitched Selena on it because I thought, we can't have a marriage blog if my wife's not on board. So you were on board within a few minutes, I think. And then, we launched a few months later, and the rest is history.
Tell me a little bit about those friends that you don't have to get specific friends, but just when people, especially after they've been married 4 or 5 years, 6 years, and they say, we're done. Or I had a wedding photographer tell me that she had a couple of clients that they didn't even make it long enough for her to get the photos back. And I'm like, what in the world?
Wow.
What do you, in those stories, are any commonalities that you see? And is it a mindset? Like, what's going on that somebody says, God, we've been doing this 4 or 5 years, and it's tough. I mean, we've all experienced tough, right? What's going on? Do you guys think, is it culturally? Like, what makes people say, we're going to give up?
I think there's a lot happening before and after you get married, right? And so before, maybe they weren't your only sexual partner, or maybe you lived with someone. There's a lot of baggage that I feel like if Christ hasn't helped you walk through that, it's going to be really hard to walk into another relationship with someone else, not having dealt with that. And then you are inevitably going to be faced with all these other conflicts, all these struggles, living with another person. And then that on top of that. So it's just multiplied weight, multiplied tension, multiplied struggles. Nobody wants to do that, right? Nobody wants to.
That, I think, is absolutely true, but I think it's symptomatic of maybe what I would say the theme is, to add to what you said, is it's the softness of heart and like a respect for each other that comes from a softness of heart, meaning that I'm going to take, namely God's word as what it is. God's word actually bears weight on my life in a way that's meaningful.
Authoritative.
It's authoritative, and I'm going to bend my will to it. I'm not going to bend it to my will. And that takes a certain softness of heart and a posturing that says, Jesus is Lord, I'm not. And that's why we say it always comes back to Jesus. That's not just, it can easily be a pat answer, right? Like, oh, you're on the verge of divorce? Go to Jesus. He'll fix it. Like, okay, the words in that statement are true, but the attitude behind it is so much, I think, can be built out a lot more in a way that's actually helpful. And so thematic, when you talk about the themes of those couples that we co-traveled alongside and saw them divorce early on, I think it's softness of heart, namely toward Jesus, toward the gospel, toward his lordship, and therefore toward each other. I don't know how to make sense of, this is why we say Jesus is the reason we're still together, because I don't know how to make sense of love aside from Christ. There's no way to measure it. There's no way to say what's love and what isn't. When I look at him, I see all that is clear. He now becomes the standard by which I am loved, therefore I should and can love. And so if a couple doesn't have that, I don't know where to go. I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I'm sure there's stuff we can do to help them, but I don't know where to
Well, and being
them.
able to fully love, because, right, Christ, I forget where I heard it. Maybe it was Matt Chandler saying the deepest, darkest place where we sin, that's the sin. That's the exact sin that Christ died for, right? Because he loved us. And so we are in fully knowing and loving someone. In fully loving someone, you're fully knowing them, right? I can't love you completely, my husband, without really knowing you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And Christ and the Holy Spirit empowers us to be able to love each other, to be able to have those conversations within the marriage covenant, and walk through those hard times and those hard words that we have to face. And so when I say like the pre-marriage stuff, if we're not able to really walk through that, I think, with Christ and understand how to resolve those, it's really hard for us to continue walking together, learning how to resolve and be fully loved in those and be fully known. We begin to build those walls. We don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to be transparent because those hurt, and we are afraid that maybe we won't be loved in those. But true love, according to Christ,
so getting
allows
to the
us
core
that.
of those issues and connecting those to the gospel, I think, is the work of a pastor, a work of a biblical counselor. Those are the ones that will start creating those conversations, those safe places to have those conversations and actually open up and pick through some of that history and find, okay, how is this affecting, how am I not believing the gospel in this area?
So for you guys, I think your podcast is a lot like ours in that we have believers who are listening, but we also have non-believers who are listening. Knowing that you guys have millions of people that are listening to you, I've got to imagine some of them are not believers. What do you say to someone that's listening right now and they're hearing words like covenant and Jesus is Lord and allowing, what do you say to them? Like, what would be something they've got to be curious, because I think the thing I've loved about you guys, you've been so true to who you are, and you've just allowed God to use that. And so talk a little bit to people who are listening right now and to go, wow, I didn't grow up in church, and I didn't have a pastor that kind of helped the situation with my parents divorcing. And talk a little bit to those people who are listening and go, wow, I don't have that, and I don't even know how to have that.
I love what you always say, like, you don't love your wife and then like love Jesus. You love Jesus through loving your wife, right?
Yeah, and I think, so for somebody who maybe doesn't know what that means to
I'm
love.
sorry, yeah,
No,
go ahead.
You're fine. What it means to love Jesus,
He permeates.
it's an opportunity. What I would say to that person listening right now is this is a grace of God that you're listening to this, and it's an opportunity to basically start that journey and finding out what that means. Now, two people who listen to our podcast, and we actually, when we spoke this morning at this conference we're at, we've learned not to assume, even if you call yourself a Christian, whether or not you call yourself one or not, we don't assume that you understand what the true gospel is. I spent half my life in a church not hearing the true gospel and not really understanding what it means to be saved or what is my faith in Christ. And that's tragic. And I think we do an injustice to younger married couples in society and the culture today if we don't lay some of that foundational work, or at least create a framework that they can start ask and get those answers to those questions. So covenant is a big one. Love is a big. What is love? We actually watched, in our book that we released this last April, we spent a whole chapter on gospel, a whole chapter on love, a whole chapter on covenant. And actually that section of that book came from our conversation. That first time you and I met at that restaurant in Dallas, John McGee was there, and he said, he was advising me, and I really appreciate it, and I'll credit him with this till I can't anymore, is you got to tackle the beliefs before you get after the behavior. The beliefs will always drive the behavior. And so we found, and I can back this up with data if I had a way to gather it, is that couples that truly understand and believe truth about love and covenant, love in terms of God's character, covenant in terms of God's character, will always have the behavior that they want. But if we just stand as a marriage ministry and look at them and say, hey, 5 tips for better communication. Here's 7 ways to have a steamy sex life that's still, alive and well when you're 5 years into your marriage. Or here's ways to manage your finances in a more practical. If we do all that, like, that's just behavior modification. But if we get down into the core of it, believer, non-believer alike, our call, we believe our mission is simply just to point people to Christ. Hey, if you don't know who this guy is, get to know him first. And hopefully we give them an avenue to do that, which we always will point people to the local church, gospel-centered church, because you need a pastor. You need people to disciple you, to walk alongside you. It's not a magic spell you recite, and all of a sudden you're just, boom, it's done. No, it's a discipleship process, sanctification process. So I could go on and on.
It's that softened heart that you guys are talking about.
Right.
If I think about my own faith journey, I start thinking about that's God softening of my heart, be soft towards
a heart
her.
of stone turned to a heart of flesh, right? And all of a sudden you're hearing it. You're actually hearing the gospel for the first time. You're not just, it's not just listening, but you're actually hearing. Yeah.
One of the few verses directly to men talks about, men, do not be harsh with your wife. My wife puts it this way. She goes, don't talk to me in your work voice.
That's good.
Yeah, and I have a friend. His wife said, "Oh no, we work together too." So we'll have to get into that. But his wife told him, "Don't talk to me like a man. Talk to me like a woman." He said, "Because you're coming in that." But it's those. It is those things. It is watching people be soft towards each other. Talk a little bit about a couple things. One thing I want you to talk about a little bit, what do you see difference in millennials marriage? But then I do want us to talk a little bit about working together. There was a study that came out that only 15% of people are really, from a married perspective, should really be working together, given their gifts sets and different that. So talk a little bit about millennials, and then we'll come back to the work piece.
Yeah. This millennials, that thought is kind of fresh because, again, we talked about that this morning. But the biggest thing that I always take away, and if other bloggers come to us or marriage ministers come to us, I say, how do we talk to this group of people? Now, technically, That's us too. We're actually technically
tail
millennials.
end.
We're on the old end.
Yeah.
Or like old millennials. But so maybe that's why this is the way I frame it. But don't be afraid to. Millennials are searching, right? So we talked about Acts 17 when Paul is at Mars Hill. He's talking to the Athenian philosophers, and they've set up an altar to an unknown God, right? And they're worshiping this unknown, because basically they're covering their bases, and they just have this curiosity about what's important, and philosophically religion and law and all these things, and they debate. And Paul comes in and says, I can tell you who that is, and his name is Jesus, and here's what he did, and here's who he was, and here's how it changes our life. And so we've learned, I think, to not assume what people believe or their worldview or what they even know as people who call themselves Christians. That's step one. Step two is don't be afraid to point them to Jesus, to say, hey, you want a relationship that lasts for life. We see that through the cohabitation rates. Like someone did a study recently that said the millennials, or the divorce rate is lower among this younger generation, and they had a bunch of reasons that they thought that, but the bottom line is they see marriage not working for their parents. They want a marriage that works. They want they want a relationship that's transparent. They want to be responsible with their finances. They want to be healthy communicators. They want a sex life that is monogamous, mostly. Nobody in the media is talking about that. They want these things, and they worship them to an extent, and that they will go to the greatest lengths to get these things. And here we are as marriage ministers, pastors, and saying to them, you worship these gods without names, and I can tell you the giver of all these gifts, and I can tell you the source, where to go to get that. And his name is Jesus. And you can get into the apologetics, the philosophy of it, and I'm convinced it's true for a lot of different reasons. But the bottom line is your heart soft, and are you ready to hear this message? And I will happily be the one to point you definitively in this direction, not just don't follow your heart. Your heart's evil. Like, don't follow it. Follow Jesus. Let him transform your heart, and then see where that goes from there. So.
It's good.
It's good.
Yep. Just amen and over here. I got the approval. That's good.
I love that, because I think a lot of times I feel like we've taught this generation that if you've got an issue, all generations, not just millennials, if you've got an issue, you can't have a marriage until the issue is resolved. We had some dear friends of ours who they finally got the babysitters, and they came over to our house, and they said, we get to go away, just the two of us, but we don't want to go. I said, why? And they said, because we've been arguing about whether we're going to move from this house to the other one or stay, and we keep arguing about it. And they said, we know we'll have to argue the whole time. And I was like, why don't you take a vacation from talking about that? These very smart people looked at me and said, can you do that? And I think what it is, it's like we've got this issue that there's none of our issues are all going to be resolved. There's always going to be something floating there. And so I feel like I watch millennials, boomers, Gen Xers, every one of us are seeing these issues as so key. And I think it comes from a good place. I think it came from the counseling community that we need to work these things out. But there's things that we're not going to work out till heaven, right? There are some things that we're not going to understand about each other ever. If we resolve all of our differences, one of us is irrelevant, right? So what would you guys say the top 3 things that you're hearing from millennials that they're struggling with? That if you went, man, if we could help them with these 3 things, boy, it would really make a huge difference.
That's a good question. And if I had to boil it down,
I think one of them would be find a true community.
Yes.
I think where you're being known, but you're also knowing others.
Sure.
You're in relationship, and you're allowing them access to your marriage, to advocate for you and not be an adversary for it, but we say it at our church, we've made the gospel a verb. You said we gospel each other, pointing people back to Christ, lovingly saying, I think we're seeing this. Can you help us understand what the issue might be here? Is there an issue, or, how can we walk through this together? And only true community can really do that. And I think we've been not victims, but we've been victims of just not great small groups, right? You got to calibrate your expectations, but having those people that know you and that you can do life with and be transparent with.
It's very easy to stay at the surface while acting like you're going deep, right?
Yes,
in a small group.
Yes.
But when you actually start peeling back more and more layers that only vulnerability can do.
Yeah. There's
that's
freedom
when you start
there.
actually feeling freedom. Yeah.
Not living in isolation.
Absolutely.
Sure, so true. And it feels like
it's easy to do.
It is, isn't it?
On our phones, we can get on there and be isolated,
false
but
community.
feel, false community.
Yeah. The second one I would say, and I don't know that we have three, maybe you'll have another one by the time I'm done, but the second one that I would say is what millennials need in terms of marriage is understanding longevity and stability with a true like long-term vision in mind, right? And so the couple that you had mentioned arguing about the move, right? You can table that conversation because you have your covenant to fall back into. Table it, rest in your covenant, enjoy each other, let love mature. Learn how to love each other. Like forget
Let's pause on that just to say, because it's let love mature. Because don't you think, like I look back, we've been married for 23 years and we've been like, always, divorce has never been an option. But we're definitely way better at marriage now than we were years past, right? Like Absolutely. You look and it is that mature process to go, it's going to get better. It's going to get better.
You trust that having a soft heart toward each other and giving of yourself, living selflessly, although it hurts, is going to ironically be one of the most selfish things you can do because it's going to bring health to your marriage, right? So so for younger couples, we always like to have them take a step back. I do not have a good record in terms of, I've married one couple, they were divorced within the first year.
We performed the ceremony.
I performed their ceremony. And I haven't done it since. And I think the reason is they met on Instagram and they have a different perspective on life itself, on reality, and that these adjustments that we make. So Bob Goff was speaking here and he was talking about flying a helicopter, how their quarter adjust, like he said he was, I can't show it's on a podcast, but they had the stick that he's controlling the direction. Thank you. You don't move it like drastically, but just do fine tune adjustments around the circle size of a quarter. Right.
Yeah.
And this couple, like many couples, they are just like, we have a problem, boom, you're all the way to the other side, and now you got a problem with this. It's just drama, right and left. And it's like, just, okay, stop. Show some maturity. Understand that life is not lived on the internet, on Instagram, on Snapchat, any of that stuff. Life is in years and decades, and if you really are in a covenant, you have all this time. Fine-tune adjustments. So you're out over time. So
I guess, go ahead.
No, we call those micro moves.
Micro moves, I love it.
Yep. It's just these little tiny things. I love it when couples get wins, and I feel like that's what you guys do. Is you help couples have wins. Like they go, oh, well, listen to this podcast, and I applied this thing, and there you go. That was helpful. Like, wow, I want to do that again. They'll lead it to you.
And I think it kind of moves into the third point of, I think we can tend. I think our generation can tend to get scared of conflict. We don't want to live in conflict. That's why we want to live on Instagram, right? We want to, mainly I think because I think we don't or haven't been taught how to resolve conflict and how to walk through it with other people and not in isolation. And so there's these fears. We don't know how to deal with this, so let's just walk away from it, right? Instead of leaning into, okay, when we made that wedding vow, I basically said, there's nothing we can't get through. And so that means that we're going to work this out, and we are going to learn how to work this out as well. Because
a lot of couples don't ever work it out. They just
because they don't know how. And so I think not just educating, that sounds so intellectual, but just loving each other and being relational and discipling each other and having mentors and leaders that can show us how to walk through conflict biblically can offer some assurance and confidence.
So I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
We had a friend who... I got two more, so I'm good. So we had a friend who I would love to tell his whole story. It's amazing. It was a national spectacle. Anyway, he went through a very hard time. And here this guy's a guy that I've known very well. And he's going through this whole ordeal by himself. I didn't know this was happening. Ended up falling into deep alcoholism, deep depression, deep PTSD. Ended up getting divorced from his wife. They spent a year apart, and then finally they reconciled and got remarried. And I found out about this like 2 years after that. And all the while, like, hey buddy, how's it going? Like via email, doing stuff together, like projects and stuff together. And we get together and I'm like, why did you do this alone? Why were you going through this alone? And why wouldn't you let me in to that conflict in your life? And I think it's learning the art of a firm rebuke and learning how to receive and give firm rebukes without acting like it's the end of the world, right? Whether it's a brother in Christ or a sister or your wife or your husband, right? And so that's what I think what you're talking about. The conflict, don't
shy away from it because you don't
them.
know. Just
Yes.
say, I don't know how to deal with this. Can we find someone or find a way to deal with this that's healthy and that will actually help us make steps towards reconciliation, not just sit and try to figure it out or run away.
Right, and we have access now. I think that's the great news. People have access to all this content, and which is scary because we call it content mountain, and it's hard to scale content mountain. But I think I feel like as people are listening, that there's podcasts like yours, there's podcasts like these, that they're going to help you, get some trusted people, and then start listening to these things. And sometimes these little wins, because I feel like in a lot of ways that in the Christian world, we've made marriage way too complicated. We've made it way, way, way too complicated. I go, why would God make the gospel simple and marriage complicated?
Yes.
I think it's a lot like the gospel. It's easy to understand. It's not easy to live out, right? I feel like that's true with marriage. And so I think as people are going in, having that softness of heart and learning these kind of things. So I know we've got some people hanging on the edge going, okay, now talk about the whole working together thing. And then I'm going to release you guys because we're at this great retreat and I've got you crammed in this dark room full of storage.
Blast.
So talk a little bit about working together. Not everybody listening is obviously going to be working together, but I think we always have to work together on certain issues, things, whether that's chores around the house. That's one of the biggest sources of conflict, as you guys know, and even reasons from divorce. Somebody sent me a study the other day. The third reason was chores. And just and I'm not going. So talk a little bit about working together. How do you make that work?
I don't know if we've actually ever verbalized it all. We kind of just do. But I feel like we've become a pretty good team. You handle a lot of the day-to-day work as far as fierce marriage goes and keeping the machine running, so to speak. And then I handle kind of our children and the day-to-day kind of home life of us. But we both have to kind of maintain some of these climates. We're both trying to bring Jesus into both of these kids, I guess, these situations. And a lot of your strengths, I feel like, play to the work that you do.
I think it's understanding. What was very pivotal for us was understanding that we are a team, even though she's not at a laptop next to me, or she's not on a computer next to me.
Well, and I trust your leadership too. You say, I think we should do this or go to this, and
you do on everything except for my editing. When I edit your writing,
you editing my writing. That's the only conflict. But it's been good. It's been sanctifying.
We'll go with sanctifying, right? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so I think learning generosity and appreciation, and being very generous with your appreciation, I think has been the key for us.
Generous with your appreciation. I love that.
So verbalizing it, and we have a nanny that we kind of have on call, who's an amazing friend of ours, and we trust, and we pay her, and it's paying her.
Community, people, other people.
Yes.
Paying her and saying, Selena, I know that you need the bandwidth to work on this thing for fierce marriage. Let me pay to have you have time. I want to buy your time, essentially. And I think that makes you feel appreciated, loved, or also, going around the house. I work from home. The girls have we have two daughters.
That was an interesting transition too, because just because he's home doesn't mean he can
doesn't mean I'm home.
I can't just open the door and say, hey, excuse me, can you do this? Yeah.
There are some boundaries there that are healthy, but by and large, there's an open door policy where, they can come interrupt anytime unless I'm in the zone. And that takes some getting used to, but seeing that as an opportunity to really serve each other, and I can serve her, so I'll come down and this is parenting now. As far as parenting goes, I'm the enforcer. So if the kids are acting up, I come down and relieve her in a way that so she doesn't have to enforce all the time. So
the Hulk doesn't come out. The green Hulk,
Daddy Hulk.
That's crazy. So there's that part of it, and then there's I'll come down and you're gone or something, taking the girls to the park, and I'll maybe do a chore or something to help out.
But also you're when you were talking about where we came from and the web development and all of that, that's really equipped you and helped you develop fierce marriage to where it is today, because you are so tech savvy. I think that's can be a struggle for at least people have come to us and said, how do you build your platform? How do you know all these things? And I'm like, well, he learned it.
So I was doing it before Fierce Marriage, right?
Yes.
And I think what you guys have done too is, in our little tiny circle of people that work with, churches and marriage, we hear that, marriage ministry was seen as boring, preachy, outdated, and feminine like 10 years ago. I think some people still feel that's the case, but I feel like there's been organizations like you guys who have said, no, we're going to do this differently. It's not going to be boring, preachy, outdated, and feminine. Mm-hmm. So I just want to say your work as a couple and you guys wrestling and trying to love each other through it and model that. I know that's why God's blessing it. I mean, it has been amazing, and it is with great excellence and clarity that you guys are doing that. So thank you for doing what you do.
You. Yeah.
If we always leave people with one simple thing.
Okay.
Just what's one simple thing? And maybe you guys can each give one. We can go there. We're going to break our rules a little bit. Just what's one simple thing that people listening could do? Because I always love reading the reviews and different people's and the ratings, because this one guy goes, every day I listen to this podcast, it's a better day for my marriage. And so awesome. What is something somebody could do to have a better day for their marriage?
All right, I got one. I'm going to say fight naked. And literally and figuratively, and quickly what we mean by that is, obviously, if you can't really argue if one of you is derobing, right? Disrobing. It's really hard to stay angry.
Fight naked. All right.
That's the funny kind of literal side of it. The figurative part, and I think the part that we'd love for couples to walk away with, is that don't go into a fight with your armor on. Stay vulnerable. Keep a soft heart. Don't go when you're naked. You can't go into a fight with weapons. You can't be armed to the hilt with, I'm thinking medieval, swords and things like that. And, and that also kind of creates kind of this, with those weapons being, you're always like this, or you're just like your mother, or remember that hurt that you did. And so fight fast, fight naked, be quick to apologize, fast to forgive. I think the better we get it, you said you're better at marriage now than you were when you first started. I think the way we've gotten better is we argue and resolve much quicker in ways that are much more productive. Things don't stew, linger, and hang out. And
quicker to say
bitterness.
sorry, huh?
Yes,
I'm the
fight
fastest to say sorry.
That's right.
I love it. I'm the fastest to say, and she wins. I love it. Yep. I love that.
I was going to say go have sex, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do. No, but you should if you haven't. It always makes your day better. But I'd say for us, adventure has really been a part of our lives. And it doesn't have to be big, grand adventures. It can be very affordable. Trying a new park that you never went to, or going on a hike, going and doing something you've been like, I should do that. And just doing it together has really just breathed life into our marriage. And again, it doesn't have to be completely time consuming. I think even like Bob Goff was saying, he had this big sort of baseball that he kept throwing back and forth to his wife. And that's really causing you to be present. And I learned somewhere that just throwing something back and forth was one of the biggest ways that brains develop with kids and with children. And so tossing something back and forth and being present and interacting with each other while you're on this little adventure together. And for us, that's again, trying a new trail. Maybe it's going somewhere on a bigger trip and planning that, and just the excitement of that. But that's really helped keep our marriage fresh, I think. And it's, it kind of brings different sides of you out that you may not see every day.
Yeah. Like we need something to look forward to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially during busy seasons. Yeah. Go, wow. This, as soon as we do this, as soon as we get done with this podcast interview, then we can go play and have fun at this beautiful retreat we are. So you guys, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dad.
I'm going to go with older brother and not dad, but I'm just so proud of you guys. I'm so proud of you guys. I think you started this whole journey with such humility, and I see you guys continue to do that, and just watching it explode and watching people feel like encouraged and loved on and believed in. So home run. I'm so proud of you guys.
Thank you. That means a ton.
Yeah.
I don't always know in my man cave when I'm doing my coding and whatnot, so it's good to hear the affirmation.
I promise. Me and the millions of people are saying, yes, your man cave. You guys are doing great. Thanks again, you guys.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Dad.
Thanks again for listening to the Married People Podcast. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. That helps us reach more people with the podcast. And if you want more marriage resources, check out our website at marriedpeople.org. Until next time, I'm Afton, and thanks for listening.